Good evening, our viewers. Welcome back to our program in which we look at social, economic, and political issues in Zimbabwe. But firstly, we will start with the final chapter of the book Social Justice and Food Security. With me here, as usual, is Director Fuma. And we are concluding this book, Social Justice and Food Security.
Thank you, Elliot. Good evening, viewers. Good evening, Elliot. Good evening, everyone around and across the globe. We know that our global reach is increasing. Today, we're going to finish off looking at Elliot Peve's book, Social Justice and Food Security, a United Nations Global Challenge. It's a book in which it touches on the issue of social justice, food security, and especially climate change. And we've seen how in recent months there's been an attempt by the United States President, Donald Trump, to sort of portray climate change as alternative facts or as fake news. And so we are also against the disrespect which is being shown towards scientific research and development, which has brought about a lot of good for humanity. And so we need to start speaking out. And today we look at Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is entitled The Sustainability Perspective. Elliot, what is the sustainability perspective?
Yes, Derek, and all our viewers. The sustainability perspective here, I was looking at what are those factors. Firstly, to define what sustainability is. And here, I think let me also start by just defining what sustainability is. We are looking at whether the human actions in pursuit of needs and wants are sustainable, not necessarily in the short term, but in the long term. So here we are looking at very specific, although from this book, Social Justice and Food Security, we're looking at the availability of food and actions as human beings in pursuit of producing food, whether we are not doing harm to the environment, which can inadvertently affect the long-term sustainability of food, the availability of food, both within our generations and the generations to come. So yes, that's in terms of, in summary, what it is I was talking about. But then I looked at not necessarily only in terms of food. I'm also looking at in terms of energy, whether it is sustainable. I also looked at the population. I think at the beginning of this book, we also looked at the exponential of population growth as we go to 2025, which the population of the world is expected to be 8.5 billion from about 7.1, 7.2 billion today. So we are looking at, yes, we are adding about 1.5 billion, and at the moment, already we've got millions of people who are hungry every day. So we are saying, is the world ready for another billion people? And are our governments doing enough in terms of policy formulation to make sure that there is availability of food and equal distribution of resources? So yes, in that way, that's what I was looking at. And I also looked at a bit about the Zimbabwean scenario, from a bread basket to a basket case, due to the shambolic land reform that was spearheaded by the current regime of Robert Mugabe's RPF. And in there also at the end of the same charter, I did bring in 2 keynote addresses by well-known politicians. One by Ban Ki-moon, and then the other one by Robert Mugabe. The Ban Ki-moon one was from the Rio de Janeiro 2012, in which the UN came up with 3 what we call voluntary commitments to save the environment. And then there is also a keynote address that was addressed by Robert Mugabe on the 2nd September of 2012 in Joburg, where Mugabe, as usual, was putting across his rhetoric that land is the economy and the economy is the land. And then in the same keynote, he also accepted that there was shortage of food in Zimbabwe in a way, but was blaming all that to the Western world. So it was to draw up a sort of a contrast in terms of policy formulation, in terms of but the governments, whether they are contributing to sort of the food shortage, social injustice in the world, and also relating to Zimbabwe, bringing in the Zimbabwe scenario so that people who are reading, they've got the perspective of various countries' initiatives, and Zimbabwe was a very good example for that. That the absence of coherent policies within governments, respective governments, can unsettle a region, and Zimbabwe being one. So yes, Derek, in summary, this is what I was talking about in the sustainability perspective.
Yeah. So what would you say to a Zimbabwe farmer today, a new farmer? What would you say to them in terms of how they can incorporate sustainable development in their farming methods?
I think firstly, yes, I think I alluded also to the 2012 Rio de Janeiro, in which they came up with 3, which were voluntary commitments, although I was very critical of them in the sense that they actually declared them voluntary commitments and therefore not binding. Firstly, there were good clauses there. One of the clauses was that finding natural solutions to food production. And the other one was innovation, the introduction of innovation, mechanization.
Yeah.
So that we can increase the output without necessarily increasing the hectareage. Because, by the way, the land is not finite. We cannot increase the land mass. We can only make use or improve the production, improve the output using the same piece of land. So, from a Zimbabwean perspective, what I can say to the Zimbabweans is that, yes, even let me just address this directly from an MDC policy perspective. That MDC accepts that yes, the land has been redistributed, and the land MDC government has no intention whatsoever to repossess land from those who have been allocated land. But what we are saying is that we are going to do a land audit. People with multiple land ownership, those will be repossessed and redistributed. People who are not producing at all, the land audit will be able to recommend. But the policy of MDC is that giving people land without giving them the title deeds, where they can use the same land to access loans, is not a solution. Like, if you look at it from a ZANU-PF perspective, it was a knee-jerk reaction, grabbing land and castling them to their friends and relatives and people with ZANU-PF cards. That's not a solution to a land issue as far as Zimbabwe is concerned.
Yeah.
We want to empower our farmers in Zimbabwe to be able to access loans, just like the previous owners were doing. They were using the land as collateral to access funds from from banks.
Yeah.
And only that. If you look at it, the farms were highly mechanized. They actually the combined harvesters, the tractors. The land was used as a business, as an enterprise, a viable enterprise. And we want to, as a party, as an MDC, we want to retain the land as a viable enterprise, as a business, capable of employing people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, capable of paying corporation tax, right, to the government, contributing to the coffers of the government. But what we have today is that revenue, the state has lost that revenue. The current owners of the farms, they are not even paying a single tax. People, they're expecting the state to help them in terms of the inputs on the farms. And that, you cannot blame them. If you give me 1,000 hectares farm with virtually not even $1 in my pocket and expect me to produce enough for export purposes or to feed the nation with not even $1, how am I going to do it? I can't even afford to pay workers. And probably you've got people there. I've seen certain circumstances where the people, farmers, indigenous farmers, moving into a 1,000 hectare farm with his wife and maybe 3 children. No workers whatsoever. And sometimes using donkeys and oxen-drawn plows to produce only 1,000 hectares. That will never work. And we are saying we need to address the issue of empowering our people once and for all. And MDC is the only party with coherent policies that will deliver real change in terms of turning around agriculture production as a vehicle for economic prosperity in Zimbabwe. And we are not talking only about farms, we are also talking about the rural people.
Yeah. So what is your comment then on command agriculture? Do you think that ZANU-PF is trying to address the issue of lack of inputs through that?
No, there's no goodwill from ZANU-PF. I think, yes, there might be some people within ZANU-PF who would cherish an initiative to give inputs to recently settled farmers. But the problem is, at this juncture where we've got liquidity crisis in Zimbabwe, where the same government can't even pay civil servants, it is a tall order for the ZANU-PF government to be able to support input, to support newly resettled farmers on inputs. It is not possible. At the moment, what we are doing is we are living at the edge of chaos as a nation. And we need a new government that actually commands the respect, that commands, that also bring in a sort of budgetary framework whereby at the moment what we have is about 75% of the budget goes to salaries, and that is not a sustainable scenario. We don't even have, within the budget itself, any budget that goes to capital infrastructure, to sustain infrastructure. This is why you've got roads decaying. They are not being serviced at all. Yeah. And this is why we also have, and to expect that the same government, when they can't even pay the civil servants in time, that they will be able to give our farmers or to support our farmers it's expecting, too much from them. It's a tall order. We know that this government whatsoever does not have a moral canvas to support Zimbabweans.
Okay, there's a question for you, Elliot, from Facebook, from my Facebook page, from Douglas. Thank you, Douglas, for that question. And the question is, how will FEVE afford farmers access to capital? And he said he agrees that land audit is the way to go.
Yeah. I think firstly, we have to accept that the current government is bankrupt. I mean, this is why we are sort of living hand to mouth in terms of the budget, and still with budget deficits. Firstly, what we need to do is, people need to understand that any investment economy works on trust. What we need is a government that actually can attract the FDI, which is the foreign direct investment. And you can only do that by coming up with investment-friendly policies. And MDC, I can assure you there, from the previous policies and from the current policies, which we are just finalizing, we are the only party with the friendly investment policies. Once you've got friendly investment policies, then you have people coming to Zimbabwe to invest at our terms. We are not mortgaging the country, neither are we mortgaging the diamonds like what ZANU-PF have been doing. People are coming to invest on our terms, and out of the investment from the business, there will be taxes. There will be corporation taxes, there will be pay-as-you-earn taxes, and from those taxes, we are able to fund capital expenditure, we are able to support our farmers. Whether we are talking about rural farmers, whether we are talking about newly resettled farmers. Okay, I have to distinguish here from, we've got A1 and A2.
Yeah.
In terms of newly resettled farmers. And the A2 being the commercial sector. And the solution to that is that you make sure that people with the land are given the title deeds. At the moment, anything can happen because the title deeds still rest with the previous farmers. So let us not make any mistake. This is a mirage that we've got the land because we don't even have the title deeds for that land. The title deeds still rest with the previous farmers. And unless legally that is addressed, then it becomes difficult for our farmers to access loans from the banks.
Yeah.
Now, where do we get the money? I can give you an example. I've been to the EU summit and forum several times, including African Union and EU summits. And African leaders have actually put across the activities that they're doing for their country. And I can give you a good example of Ghana. Ghana, they realized that their small-scale farmers or small-scale businesses were unable to access funds from the traditional banks.
Yeah.
Here, I'm talking about the Barclays banks, the Standard Chartered of the Africa, right?
Yeah.
Because the collateral that they asked for, and what Ghana did was the government set aside a fund from taxes that they were collecting from even the same banks and companies. So they had a pool of money, which they then gave to a bank to administer on the part of the government. You see what I'm saying? So that the element of stringent collateral or security being demanded by the banks falls away. So this money is actually coming from the government, but it's a special fund accessible to the farmers themselves. So the reason why they gave it to the banks is because the banks, they've got the instruments to monitor, they've got the capacity and the technical know-how to collect the money from those who might have borrowed. So it is possible and it's feasible.
So still on that, Douglas, there's another question, but before I ask that question, so what is your comment then on the government proposing that farmers can use livestock as collateral to get money from banks?
Look, I think this is a small screen of a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at it. Who are those banks that have got the money? We're talking about Western banks, Barclays, Standard Chartered. Would Barclays accept, livestock as collateral? Standard Chartered, would they accept livestock as collateral? Look at it. In terms of investment, there is also liabilities and risks. And there's a limit of risk that any investor can take.
Yeah.
There can be a disaster in terms of a calamity, a natural calamity that can wipe the whole head of cattle, right?
Yeah.
Because, mind you, this is not a physical asset. It's not a physical asset.
So you're talking maybe foot and mouth?
There can be foot and mouth, there can be any other disease that can wipe the head, and that will have an adverse effect to the banking sector. It becomes a ripple effect. Banks eventually will close. And these are toxic loans.
Some people have argued that the banks can actually, or they can set up insurance instruments to protect in the case that some livestock may be affected by natural disasters or disease.
I think what we are doing is we are just passing the risk from one factor to another.
Yeah.
Because you are saying, okay, fine, the banks will pass the risk to the insurance.
Yeah. And what does the insurance do?
And again,
if 80% of the livestock are affected.
Yeah. And even in the Western world, we know that even
natural disasters are normally not covered by most insurance.
Yes, they are not covered because
otherwise they bankrupt the insurance company because everyone is claiming at the same time.
Yeah, because don't forget that the insurance is not there to spend clients' money willy-nilly. It is an investment. Whoever put their money in the insurance, they expect a return of investment. And there's a limit of risks that they can take. They've got risk managers.
Yeah.
So it's not as easy as that.
That's true.
Each entity there is trying to make a profit, a sustainable profit. So all what we are saying is Zimbabwe, there's no reason why Zimbabwe must invent a wheel. Okay? All what we need to do is, okay, fine, what works and what doesn't work. And we don't need to travel very far. We are surrounded by countries like South Africa, like Mozambique, like Botswana, like Zambia, where their systems are working.
Right.
Some of that I've mentioned, the systems are not perfect, but they are working better than Zimbabwe.
Okay, I would like to move to Douglas' second question now. He says, how do you intend, because this is an issue which I've seen it discussed in many places, the issue of title deeds. I think some people agree that farmers should be given title deeds. Some people disagree. They think that, but the fact that the title deeds are still in the hands of the former farmers, I think, is something that we need to look at. So Douglas asks, how do you intend to address the issue of title deeds? How would you do that?
I think firstly, you cannot address the issue of title deeds without a land audit first. Because otherwise you end up giving title deeds, 10, 20 title deeds to 20 farms. to one person, Hiyango Kasuguye, and the same will handle us down the line. But what we're saying is, firstly, you've got land audit, to one person per farm, right? And then the next thing is, we need legally to address the issue of title deeds, right? In other words, what we need to come up with the legal position. We don't have the title deeds, okay? But there is the deeds office.
Yeah.
And the deeds office is a Zimbabwean department. And the deeds office is not our farmers. It's not our, it's not our indigenous farmers who are owning the land. And Mugabe knows it. So this is why that this land issue was politicized, and it was just a smokescreen. The truth of the matter is that even as we speak, we don't own the land. Because for as long as we do not have the title deeds, down the line, and there is a reason why even the government itself issued letters that people who were given farms should not construct permanent structures. They knew the legality. They were trying to play around, with the legal instruments. But what you are saying is that is not a definitive solution to the land issue in Zimbabwe. What we need is to solve this issue once and for all. And we need to solve this issue once and for all with even the people who are with the title deeds. So those deeds must pass from one. I mean, it is a legal requirement that if you buy an asset from somebody, the title deed is transferred from one person to another. Okay? So this is what we are talking about.
Yeah.
We need to address that issue. It's not that it is impossible to obtain the title deeds. Because as a government, there are facilities and instruments where you can pass title deeds from one person to another, but we need to address that legally.
Okay, so when we say that we're going to do a land audit, what are we trying to achieve with the land audit?
With the land audit, firstly, we are trying to say, okay, fine. We know very well that previously 2,500 commercial farmers owned 3/4 of federal arable land, which of course we know that it was very unfair. And the intention of land redistribution was very noble. And for your information, this was never started by ZANU-PF in 1999 or 2000. It was MDC's policy. This land audit has always been there. It was actually crafted by MDC in 1999. That we wanted to do in land audit, not necessarily to the newly settled farmers, to the commercial farmers. And we knew that there were farmers with more than one farm. Yes, but all what we are saying is the land was an unfinished business.
So we could have actually used the law to swap ownership or to change ownership.
Yes, and it was very clear even in 1999 before this land invasion to say what we are going to do is we knew very well that there was certain land, certain farms, which was land absenteeism, where the owners either died or they left the country and there was no production.
Maybe they were in a home in the UK.
Something like that. We knew that, and those were our first target. We also looked at any farmer who has got more than 2 farms, right?
Yeah.
We were going to negotiate and buy the other farm and redistribute.
Okay.
What we wanted was an orderly land reform.
Yeah.
Right? That was not going to disrupt in terms of the employment, in terms of production.
Okay.
Not haphazard of ZANU-PF, whereby over 500,000 people lost their livelihood those who are working from the farm.
So this is interesting, Elliot, because you talk about the fact that the MDC actually had a land policy in their manifesto.
Correct.
Which ZANU-PF jumped onto and actually accelerated using expropriation. So yes. Douglas is asking, how do you intend to pay? Do you intend to expropriate? Because that is what needs addressing. If you say we're going to provide title deeds, the title deeds are still in the hand of the previous farmers.
Yeah.
How are we going to get the title deeds from the previous farmers?
I think if you look at it, even on paper, the ZANU-PF policy says that they were going to compensate only improvements on the land.
Yeah.
And that is not an MDC policy. That is a ZANU-PF policy. But if they followed on it, no, they haven't. But what I say is, ZANU-PF is unable to pay for the improvements anyway, we know that. Because they do not have the goodwill. They are valuable. All what you are saying is, if you have got a government with a goodwill, both nationally, regionally, and internationally, it is possible to source funds to address this issue amicably. It is in the interest of the region, and it is in the interest of the international community. Such an issue is amicably resolved. But they have to trust the right government. ZANU-PF, my view, in the 1980s, 1982, 83, and 84, they were given money for this set of, to buy farms. Money poured in from donors. Initially, yes, they did buy some farms. And
yeah, I remember.
Mindamirefu, right?
Yes. One of my uncles actually got a Mindamirefu farm.
Yes. Initially, yes, they were true to that, but thereafter, greed then crept in. And what we saw were now the big chefs, grabbing more than one farm, two farms, etc. And the money was misappropriated to such an extent that the donors, when they asked the accountability of the same money. ZANU-PF became so arrogant, and so the donors then stopped providing that funding. So the funding was coming.
Yeah.
And where people out there were willing to fund for an orderly and a lawful reform. Yeah. But what I say is, from an MDC perspective, it is possible for us because our policies are, one, investor-friendly, we are a democratic party, and we do not intend, to be lawless, like what ZANU-PF is.
Right. Here's your next question. I think we can now move on from that. But this question is related to what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And the question is Zimbabwe the second richest country in Africa?
Yeah,
or developed country in Africa?
I actually, for your information, I listened to that from our president, and to me it was like he's a person who lives from a very different planet than you and me.
Can I tell you what some people call that? They call it reality distortion field. Reality distortion field, which means you can actually distort what is the reality on the ground, and some people would believe it. It's all to do with fake news and alternative facts that we've been talking about in recent weeks. So if someone in his position can say something like that, some people begin to wonder if he's actually correct.
Look at from 1980, that guy has always been a trigger happy when it comes to using a microphone. Give him a microphone, he will say anything, totally tangent with the reality. We know that. And look at it, but I didn't expect him to say it at the World Forum because this is where, the highest probable concentration of economic, economic experts are at the moment. And given the situation that Mugabe himself knows it very well, that if he has got any small element, he flies to Hong Kong, to the Middle East, right, for medication. His children are not even being educated in Zimbabwe, right?
Or giving birth in the second most developed country in the world.
If it is a most developed country, second most developed country in Africa, is what you are saying, then why does he have to go abroad for medication, for a simple medical procedure, for holiday? He can't even trust his own people to go to Victoria Falls, right? His children are not even going to school in Zimbabwe. But let me put it across in terms of empirical data as to where are we from a Zimbabwean perspective. I think I'm going to talk about in terms of the GDP purchasing parity, because that sort of is a global measure of how rich a country is. And I think it will give our viewers out there an indication of whether Mugabe was right or not, because figures normally don't lie. The first on the ladder, okay, in terms of the GDP purchasing parity, is not even South Africa. It's actually Egypt with 1.1 trillion.
1.1 trillion.
Yes, dollars.
So that's the GDP. And what do you mean by purchasing power parity?
Okay, this is the aggregate worthiness of goods and services produced within a country on an annual basis.
Okay, so they are actually producing
are wealthy annually.
Right, which means Zimbabwe is producing a lot of goods and services. If we are the second after South Africa.
Yes.
And as you have shown, South Africa is not even.
No. The first one is Egypt at 1.1 trillion.
Yeah.
Second one is Nigeria at 1.052 trillion. And then South Africa is number 3 with 736 billion.
736 billion.
And then Algeria, 609 billion.
Algeria.
And then Morocco at 282 billion.
Morocco, yeah.
Sudan, 176 billion. Ethiopia, 174 billion.
Yeah.
Kenya, 152 billion.
Yeah.
Tanzania, 150 billion. Tunisia, 130 billion. Ghana, 120 billion.
Are we going to go to Zimbabwe soon?
Libya, 90 billion.
Yeah.
We are not going to Zimbabwe soon, unfortunately. But I think I've talked about maybe about 15 of those, and Zimbabwe is nowhere nearer as I speak. But I think to give a picture to our viewers, let's sort of look at our neighbors.
Okay, before you look at that, Douglas wants to know what the GDP per capita is and whether that is not a better measure in order to compare like for like in terms of how much each person is getting. Because the GDP is a big pie, the economy is a big pie. How much are we getting per person?
Yeah, of course, we can go per capita, but you find that the GDP purchasing parity is the best measure because it does an aggregate. It also takes into consideration the population anyway.
Okay, it does an aggregate. What do you mean by aggregate?
It adds all our revenues and our worthiness per the whole year.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then let me compare now with our neighbors, because I think it makes sense. Because the moment we start comparing with Egypt and South Africa, we might get lost in the maze of things.
Okay, let's go for our neighbors.
Yeah, Zambia 65 billion.
Okay.
Botswana 36 billion.
Both 36.
Mozambique 30 billion. Zimbabwe 28 billion.
Oh, okay. So even within Southern Africa, what about South Africa?
736 billion.
Mentioned it's 736. So who comes after South Africa? It's Zambia.
Yes.
I remember we used to have a good laugh with the Zambian Kwacha some decades ago. Then we have Botswana.
That's very well. They're doing very, very well.
With a very small population. Then we have Mozambique.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we have Zimbabwe. So within Southern Africa, we are number 6, 5, 6. Because we have South Africa, then so we are number 5.
Look, I've not here looked at. Of course, Malawi is a bit lower than us in a moment, just a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, but what we are saying is here is it is an illusion to say Zimbabwe is number 2, because even South Africa is not number 2.
Even South Africa is. That's interesting.
Number 3. But what we are saying is a lot of countries have moved forward.
Yeah.
And we do not need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? We only need to look at what is working within our neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to do a cut and paste, but we can scale it down.
Yeah.
So yes. So in a way, answering to what Mugabe was saying, I was shocked that it seems within the ZANU-PF government, they've totally lost the moral compass for economics.
This is the same government which is telling us that there is 90% employment when we're saying there's 90% unemployment. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me.
Oh, it doesn't, yeah. I mean, Zimbabwe is second, so, and 90% employment. All those figures are being just placated from the air.
Yeah.
And this is the bush economics that has actually driven Zimbabwe where we are. Yes.
Right. My question though is Africa doing itself a favor by using only the GDP measure? Considering that when you look at the UK, the GDP measure for the UK has been carefully crafted, and in the UK, for example, you cannot buy a chicken from a neighbor because they've set up a system which allows every transaction in this country to be accounted for. So, for example, if you go to the shops, you buy something, the Inland Revenue is getting some money out of every transaction that you make, even if it means buying something which looks like it's nothing, but they've calculated every single thing that you purchase, and you're going to pay some tax on it. So with salaries, people get salaries, they are taxed. They buy fuel, they are taxed. They buy chicken, they are taxed. They buy anything that you buy which is not exempt from VAT, like some children's product. Everything is recorded. Now, when you come to Zimbabwe, for example, what we're recording is only a few of the things, or a few of the transactions which are actually recorded. But if someone buys a goat in Kumusha, that transaction is not known about. No one knows that my neighbor sold me a goat for $50. So the government gets nothing out of that. Although someone can argue that the neighbor then gets to use that $50 and they pay taxes or whatever they're going to use it for. But this is just an example of how we have not really incorporated all of our resources Okay.
I think I heard that I was on radio on Thursday.
Yeah, to reflect all the transactions that are taking place.
Yeah, and I know there was somebody from Zambia who was saying, so I think you're failing to understand that Zimbabwe is unique. Okay?
Yeah.
So, and you are saying that all those figures you are talking about economics, etc., it does apply to Zimbabwe.
Are they Western propaganda?
So I said, okay, fine. So, in terms of the GDP, in terms of budgeting, etc., it applies to every country. 53 countries out of 54 in Africa, except Zimbabwe. I asked him, what's special about Zimbabwe? That within Zimbabwe, you don't want to talk about figures. You know, South Africa is what it is because of budgets, because of figures, because of economics. Zambia is what it is now because of that. Mozambique is what it is now because of that, Botswana, right?
Is your Facebook Live, is the volume on? Because I'm getting feedback.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Right. So, in a way, it's like, so what we are saying is, this is just a lame excuse. Why is Zambia to say, because we have got a high level of informal sector, which is not accounted for. And therefore, it's not a true reflection of our economic power base. But what you are saying is, right, why is it that we are an informal sector?
Yeah.
Right? That is not a benefit. And people have been driven to informal sector because of absence of employment. Because of, a meltdown of the economy. Because companies have closed. But what I'm saying is, I also communicated with this person from Zambia to say, look, the figures that we are talking about, they are not generated in the West, like what you're talking about. These are figures which are generated in the country by the current government. So every government in the world has to submit these figures to the UN, the respective bodies. They don't just do some estimations. So ZANU-PF itself is responsible for these fiscal policies, the monetary policies, and the empirical data that we're talking about.
And the failure to come up with a system which can record all this data.
Oh yes.
Because if you go on the internet and you want to look for some information on Zimbabwe, sometimes it's very difficult to get it.
Yeah, but that's deliberate for ZANU-PF, isn't it? So that you don't have the correct information to evaluate their failure of running an economy. Yeah, but that is not the only measure. Let me mention that is not the only measure that we are talking about in terms of trying to look at the favorable or the success of the current government in terms of governance, in terms of the financial discipline. We also talk about the poverty data line, which at the moment stands at 73% of the population of Zimbabwe lives below the poverty data line.
Yeah.
So we have got, and translate that in terms of the population, we are talking about over 10 million of Zimbabweans live below the poverty data line. And only 3 million have got $1 in their pockets.
Right. One of the arguments I've heard now, I'll just mention this now because it's relevant now, is that a person without a pound in the UK can really feel the impact of not having £1. Because every transaction that they want to carry out, they can't do it without using that £1. Whereas if you look at Zimbabwe, for example, a person without a pound can still survive.
Yes.
Because they don't really need that £1 to get most of the resources that they want. In terms of Especially if they don't live in town, they live in the rural areas. What do they need a pound for? If they want water, they go and get kutsime. There's no need to pay for that water. If they want they want food, they go and hunt. All they need is their dogs. They go and hunt, so they've got everything. So when you say Mbuya Varukumusha is living below $1 or £1 a day, it's not the same as Mbuya Varuku UK, who is living below £1 a day. That is the argument which has been put across.
Do you know what? That argument is actually defines a failed state. Because
I say it's excuses.
It is. I was reading about it today.
Yeah.
You know, Zimbabwe is the only country in Africa where there's been a migration from cities to rural areas. The only country in Africa. You know, in every developing, or a developed country, or a country that is actually on the path of recovery, there's always a migration from rural areas to towns in seek of employment.
Yeah.
So there will be investments, there will be new companies being opened, and people looking for jobs, and companies looking for people to employ. Right? Now, in Zimbabwe, because people, they are so disillusioned, nobody is looking for employment anymore.
Yeah.
So people, those with the raw links, they are actually living in droves from cities, going to rural areas, because they realize that they can't survive in towns.
Yeah.
They would rather go to rural areas, get a piece of land from their parents or relatives, etc., and grow food for their own consumption.
Yeah.
That is not a modern economy in the 21st century. We are going back to the subsistence way of living.
Yeah.
And we cannot celebrate subsistence at this juncture in 21st century. Yeah. They are not going back, they are not going to rural areas to start businesses.
Yeah.
Get employment. They are not getting to rural areas and mechanize and employ people.
Yeah.
They are just going to beg for a small land so they can grow vegetables, they can grow food for themselves, so they can't starve. Whilst they are waiting for the right government, and we are the right government, and we want to reverse that. So we cannot celebrate on that. And Zimbabwe, for your information, is the only country in Africa.
Yeah.
Where there's now a net migration from town to rural areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is not synonymous with a second developed country like what Mugabe is trying to say.
Yeah.
It is actually synonymous of a failed state in terms of economy.
So do you think that, because some people call them the Western standards, do you think they are sustainable? I mean, the way that we've adopted the economic models of the West, is that sustainable? Is the failure of the Zimbabwe as a failed state a reflection of how difficult it is to implement Western models of economic growth and development, or it's just a reflection of ZANU-PF as a failed government?
It's a reflection of ill governance by ZANU-PF party. If it can be tracked back to the Western model, then it should have been affecting every country in Africa. But it is not.
Yeah.
We are actually an island of disaster. If you look at our neighbors. And mind you, nobody is imposing the Western model in South Africa. Nobody is imposing the Western model in Zambia or Mozambique, etc. You know, from a leadership perspective or a governance perspective, yes, you can borrow a model and scale it down or tailor make it to embed within your culture, within your values, within the scope of the resources that you have.
Yeah.
You know, so but ZANU-PF is an arrogant. It's about corruption. You know, rampant corruption. We've seen people like Shiangwa owning over 10,000. You know, over 10,000 hectares.
Yeah.
Of land in towns. Thousands of stands.
Yeah.
Almost owns Harare. One person. And we've seen people like Shombo with houses, 28, 38 houses. We have seen Mugabe with 9 farms. We've seen massive looting by the people in power. You know, people who we have no intention whatsoever to save the nation. But for selfish ends, they are actually putting their own personal, you know, egos in front of national interests. Yeah. And this is where we are. And as we go to 2018, I think the message will be loud and clear to the people of Zimbabwe on the type of people who have been ruling us for the past 38, 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've come to the end. And is there anything else you wanted to discuss? What's been happening? I know there was the issue here with Zimbabwe is the second largest economy after South Africa. We've also had the issue of the goats as currency or as payment for school fees. Do you want to touch on that maybe briefly?
Yeah. Can I just respond? I've got
a question there.
I've got.
Let's go to that question first, and then we can.
The others, I think they will agree with me. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to deliver. Audit is the way to go, leader. So a lot of Zimbabweans, they are in favor of land audit, which has been on our books, and we are not in a hurry to remove it from our policy books until we implement it. Jackson Muzivi, our constitution guarantees security of tenure for current occupants, and without amendments of that clause, holding title deeds alone will simply qualify a holder for a compensation, not reoccupation. Okay? Yes. And then Adolf Jamela, ZANU-PF invasion of white-owned farms was driven by the motive to destroy what Mugabe perceived as an MDC financial support base. Right. So those I've got about more, but those were the sort of comments and questions. Right. Okay. So yes, back to you.
Yeah. So my question was, we're looking at Zimbabwe has no currency at the moment.
Yes.
Chinamasa has refused to say that the bond notes are a currency, so we're not considering them as a currency.
Yeah.
At the same time, the Minister of Education, Primary and Secondary Education, Dr. Dokora, he made comments alluding to the fact that parents can actually use school fees. I mean, they can use goats as payment for school fees. And he later corrected, or he later said that what he meant was parents can talk to local councils. They can set up like a goat market in which they can take goats and other livestock, and then they get money to be able to pay for school fees. And the issue is still that we need to understand what money is and how we can come up with our own currency. I'm sure everyone agrees we need our own currency, but maybe not with the current government. So what is your take on using goats as a form of payment? for fees?
Yeah, I think look at it. The government's role in any economy is that of fiscal policy, not monetary policy. Because the monetary policy is the prerogative of the central bank.
Okay, so a minister cannot decide on a monetary policy like.
No. That's totally the central bank. That's what it should be in the 21st century, or a democratic dispensation, or a free market. To which case, Zimbabwe has always been declaring itself in that way.
Yes.
Fiscal policy, in terms of, yes, the government can actually intervene in terms of taxes.
Yeah.
Either to raise taxes so that they close the hole, the budget hole. Yes, it's acceptable in terms of reviewing tariffs and import duties, etc. So that is the role of the government.
Yeah.
Which is called the Keynesian theory, as opposed to the free market of the United States by free domain. Now, coming back to this God business, it is not the responsibility of the government to say, now you can use barter trade. Because it is an admittance that they failed. Okay? And we need actually to take advantage of that advantage, because what Dokora was saying was to say, hang on, we have tried to manage the economy, and we have failed. So go back to barter trade.
Yeah.
Go back to the 18th century, right? That's where we've taken Zimbabwe back to 18th century. And this is where we are. So I think we, opposition, must capitalize on that. That this is an admittance of ZANU-PF. That they failed. I mean, people have always been, if there's no money, if the government is doing nothing, always find a way.
Yeah.
And we've seen people are going back to rural areas instead of going to towns. The government didn't tell them.
Yeah, there was actually a report, I think it was written by Tony Hawkins in Harare and Joseph Cotterill in Johannesburg, where the title was Zimbabwe to allow goats, cows and sheep as bank collateral. And the government was actually introducing legislation in parliament for borrowers to register movable assets as collateral at a central bank registrar. So someone is going to get a job there as central bank registrar. And then the bill would require commercial banks to accept them as security for credit. And by movable assets, they include any type such as machinery, motor vehicles, livestock, and accounts receivable. So I think they actually try. Maybe Dokora was tapping into that to say, if the government is going to allow movable assets, a goat is a movable asset. You don't know.
Those are desperate measures.
Yeah.
Those are desperate measures, and you normally shouldn't hear that from a government. Not in the 21st century.
But what is so hard then about coming up with our own currency? Why is it so difficult for them to say? Because these guys, they normally do what they want. Why can't they just wake up and say, okay, yes, Zim dollar is back?
But yes, they can. Look, they can do that. But for you to sustain a current, right, you need to balance between the imports and exports.
Okay.
And at the moment, we've got a deficit of 2.7 billion.
So in other words, we are not getting enough. Okay, we're not exporting enough.
We are exporting 3.2 billion and we are importing 5.7 billion.
Okay.
So there's that 2.7 billion deficit already. Now, what that means
so if you are importing more, it means you value foreign currency more than your own currency.
Indeed, but it also not necessarily, that's not the sole factor, but is that because you have nothing to export competitively. Does it make sense?
Yes. What about it?
Our companies have collapsed.
Yeah.
So, you know, you look at the textile industry collapsed, the dairy market has collapsed, mining collapsed, a lot of our industries have collapsed, which used to export and bring in foreign currency.
But I still suspect that if you look at the diamond industry, those mineral resources, they are very absent from what people talk about on a daily basis. It's like I always say, we probably have 3 different economies in the same country. We've got the rural economy, then we've got the urban economy with the vendors and the and the taxi drivers and the touts and all that. Then we've got a ZANU-PF economy, in which they are probably running these, they are selling these minerals, but they are not declaring anything to the country. So these guys could be running a parallel economy at the same time as we are struggling to run an urban economy. Then there's a rural economy which is sustaining itself there. Like the example I was giving earlier on to say, Mbuya Warumusha does not really require as much money as Mbuya Warum town. And at the same time, a ZANU-PF minister can afford to go to outside for medical treatment because they are living in this other economy, which the rest of the country has no access to.
No, I think you have summed it very well. This is why there's a few, maybe about 2% of the population who actually want the status quo to continue because they are benefiting from the chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always the case. This is why even in war-ravaged countries like Syria, for example, there are people who are making money out of it.
We saw how Russia came up with billionaires out of the chaos which was going on.
Yes. So there are actually people who thrive in chaos. They can't survive. Actually, if you do a conflict resolution and that there is peace in the area, the same people will influence another chaos in another country, so that they can continue to reap on chaos.
Which is why it's encouraged that people get involved in politics as a way to rebalance the economy, to rebalance income distribution, to rebalance capital distribution. Because I think this is what people do not understand in terms of why they need to be involved in politics. For example, even in opposition politics. So instead of forming a lot of small or splintered political parties, this is where we should be putting ideas together in order to come up with a way to challenge those imbalances which are so glaring. Because if a president can afford to go for an eye checkup somewhere, yet children are dying because the infant mortality rate for people giving birth is on the increase. I was looking at some figures the other day. There are actually more people dying, than before because of the lack of equipment in hospitals, lack of medication in our local hospitals.
Yes, indeed. But look at it. I don't think ZANU-PF is concerned at all with all those figures that you're talking about, that many people are dying because they can't access medication, that the economy has collapsed and people are starving. ZANU-PF doesn't care. And if you look at it, the top brass of ZANU-PF, they can afford anything.
Yes.
So
anything, anytime.
Yeah, because these are people who are very selfish. They don't care what is happening to the population of Zimbabwe. Mind you, this is why they know very well, this is why they use violence during election. They know very well if they had convinced the populace of what they've done to them and what they intend to do, they have virtually no audit of what good they've done to the people, other than violence. But I've always said, violence is not a permanent disability. Fear is not permanent disability. And people one day, they will revolt and they will fight back. But unfortunately, what we have in Zimbabwe is we've had generations that were born in poverty. They're born free. They've not known any other political party ruling other than ZANU-PF. They've not known any other president other than Robert Mugabe. And some of them, they've actually given up. And they think that it is normal to be poor.
Yeah.
It is normal.
One thing I always comment is, not only do they think it's normal to be poor, but they also think it's normal for a minister to be rich.
Oh, yes.
So if a minister dies a poor person, or if a minister gets into office and within the first 2 or 3 years, they don't have 5 or 6 cars, they don't have a farm, So we've come to accept that it's normal for a normal person to be poor, and it's normal for a politician to be rich.
And this is why you find we've got mushrooming of those political parties, because politics have now been turned into business. Because people have realized that, you just need to force yourself in, get elected as an MP, the government buys you, an expensive car, 35,000, 40,000, right? And then after that, you have an unfettered access to richness, to deals and tenders and all that. So politics have become the only source of employment.
Right. Why Africa has not developed. I read an article recently. I'll see if I can find it now. But I think it's about 2 days ago, where they were talking about reasons why Africa is not developing. And one of the things they were looking at was the resource curse, in which if you look at all the countries with resources, that can bring in more than 25% of revenue in terms of their yearly budget. Countries like Nigeria, countries like the DRC, just the resources, the oil, the diamonds, and all that, those minerals are bringing in more than a quarter of their national budget. And in such instances, the government does not really rely on monies coming from taxes. In other words, the government is not really beholden to the electorate, which is why they don't really need to sell economic policies to an electorate so that they can win, they can get into power, because they've got this access to free cash from outside. So because of that cash from resources, they are able to sustain themselves, but they can't share with the whole nation. So they sustain themselves, and that helps to keep them in power. So do you think, because Zimbabwe is also mentioned in that article, and it's mentioned in terms of the Marange diamonds.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm asking, if these guys, they are getting this money from Marange and they are using it quietly, to sustain themselves.
I think that is one element. Corruption.
Yes. So that's that's part of the corruption, that they are using that money.
I think,
corruptly.
yeah. I think in terms of South Africa, or in terms of Africa, corruption is doing more harm than good. Because you look at it, that one person with mud millions, when the government itself, some people have got more money than the government.
Yes.
Right? Yet the same money was siphoned from the government. And the government is doing nothing to that, in fact.
Yeah.
That is seriously a hindrance to development in Africa. That's one aspect. Yeah. The other aspect is that Africa relies more on raw materials than finished goods. So much of the products that they export are actually raw materials. They are not adding value to it.
Which means, and that also comes from the article, which means that because they can sell their resources for foreign currency, and because we're not producing any products, we're not making any cars, a minister in Germany does not need foreign currency to be able to buy a Mercedes-Benz from Zimbabwe. Because Zimbabwe is not making Mercedes-Benz, they are made in Germany. But a minister in Zimbabwe, as soon as they have cash which they have used, which they have acquired from selling diamonds, now they need products, because we're not making those products, so we need products from outside, which means we have a greater need for imports. And also the fact that diamonds, for example, diamonds the value of other exports could suffer because of diamonds, because diamonds are bringing in most of the foreign currency. So there is less demand for the other products, or for the other resources to be competitive on the world market.
The other issue as well is that Africa is actually suspicious with itself.
Yeah.
What I mean is, African countries, they rarely trade with each other.
With each other, yes.
So, trading within member states of the 54 African countries is less than 35%. The other 65% is, these are exports outside Africa. And within Africa, to say that, you've exported, if you say you've exported and you're from Zimbabwe, they think you've exported to Britain or America. And if you say you've exported, and they say, oh, well, I've exported to Malawi or to Mozambique. To them it doesn't make sense. So there is this colonial mentality where even within African member states, they don't trust each other.
Yes, an interesting.
And Africa needs to trade with itself. It is cheaper for Africa to trade with itself.
Yeah.
You find that people...
In fact, actual figures have shown that Africa is... what's leaking out of Africa is about 192 billion. I think that's an annual figure.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very big figure compared to what is coming in as aid. So while we think that Africa is being given aid, actually Africa receives about 30 billion in annual monetary handouts.
Yeah.
But it actually loses 192 billion to the rest of the world within the same time frame. So we're losing 192. So we're losing about 162 billion.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you look at China is what it is today because of the consumer power. Because there are about 1.5 billion consumers in China, and that is a good market. Gone are the days whereby population was deemed as a liability.
But the problem now is, that instead of us exporting to China because it's a big market, China has actually found Africa as a market for their own cheap product.
Oh, certainly.
I've always said, if you look at China, that is where Nike produces their products because of the cheap labor there.
Yeah.
But Africans will go to China, and instead of buying brands like Nike, they'll buy the very cheap Xinjiang, we call them. And those are products which are dumped in Africa, but they hardly last a long time. So that is that Africa has become, instead of becoming an exporter of goods to China, they've actually become an importer of useless goods from China.
Do you know? Yeah. The point that you've made is that Africa can be very rich without exporting outside its continent.
Yeah. So imagine if that 160 billion is circulating within Africa.
Do you know why I'm saying so? Because the population of Africa is 1.03 billion, which is almost near to China.
Yes.
Right? But not only that, look at the EU. EU has got a population of 450 million.
Yeah.
But it's the disposable income of the combined disposable income of the population. And everybody, China wants to export to EU, Africa. Africa, we are 1 billion. But everybody in Africa, instead of marketing within the billion, they want to market to the 400 million.
Yes, they want to market to less people.
To less people.
So we don't understand the concept of numbers here.
But look,
which goes to the same point that you mentioned earlier, to say, look, population used to be a liability, but it's no longer a liability because
it's an asset.
Yeah, it's an asset. Like if you look at the countries which are the most developed, it's also the countries with the biggest population.
India, for example, and China.
India is rising because of its population, because they've discovered a way of how they can use those numbers.
Yeah,
each person can individually be a driver of economic growth and development.
Yeah,
and so it's the same thing with the Chinese, and same thing with the Americans.
And I think I'm grateful because I do attend quite a lot of forums and summits.
Yeah.
With the policymakers from Africa and from EU, including sometimes heads of states from Africa and the EU. And I listen attentively. I have contributed in most cases and challenging the heads of state in Africa. And some of them you can see that they live in an illusion. They don't even know the figures. Like, sometimes you say, hang on. Your products, right? Those are perishable products. Those are products sought after by member states in Africa. You try to sell them to your neighbors. No. And all they will be doing, they will be complaining about tariffs in Europe.
Yeah, because the Europeans are trying to protect their own products. They want to protect their own farmers. So if they are going to try and sell products or farm products to Europe, Europe has to protect its own farmers as well. So they're going to put tariffs to punish anyone who's trying to sell to them.
Look, so this is what we are saying. Why don't you sell within the African member states? Right? In terms of markup, better markup. In terms of transportation, less costs. Right? In terms of the language, in terms of the barriers, right? It's easier.
Exactly.
And I think, on the 7th and 8th of June, I might as well share this with our viewers, that I will be in Brussels for the EU and African Union Business Forum, preparing the agenda for the EU-African Summit in Côte d'Ivoire in November, on the discussion points in terms of bilateral relations between the EU and Africa. And so from now onwards, we'll be discussing a lot about how Africa can rediscover itself and can distribute wealth.
Yeah.
How we can benefit from the new trade regime order.
Okay.
And I hope and trust that our viewers out there will also be contributing, and I can take those contributions to the forums where I'm going, or to the meeting with the EU, the EU Commission, and also there will be some ministers from Africa as well.
Yeah, I think this is something you need to start communicating this on a daily basis if possible.
Indeed.
I'll be talking to you about how, because Facebook now has enabled you to post status updates.
Yes.
Where you can be using video. So we're going to talk about that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And what was those 2 days when I'll be in Brussels, I'll also do some live updates where, by the side, and people can do some contributions as well.
Yeah.
So it's one, Zimbabwe has got the capacity to turn around the economy. They've got the skill base, they've got the resources, and I think we don't have to wait until Mugabe is gone. We can strategize ourselves and take the rightful position and drive the economy, African economy, not necessarily from this southern part of it. And I think gone are the days that we should be spectators to global events, and let's take control of ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've talked quite a lot today. We started off by looking at Elliot's book, Social Justice and Food Security, United Nations Global Challenge. It's a challenge for every country in the world to make sure that we have sustainable development, that we are using our resources in a sustainable manner. It is said that scientists will tell you that you can remove human beings from the planet, and if you do that, the planet will thrive. But if you remove all the resources on the planet and you leave human beings will not survive. So we need that environment, and we need to use it sustainably. That means we need to use it in a way that it benefits us today, tomorrow, and it also benefits future generations. And so we need to protect the environment so that it can look after us. If we don't look after the environment, then it's not going to look after us. Then we also delved into other areas, such as the claim that Zimbabwe is the second most developed country in Africa. We put to rest that claim, that it's a reality distortion fueled by the president, who is living in a parallel universe. We don't know in what universe he's living, but it's not the same as everyone else is living. Whether he was referring to Singapore as an African country, we're not sure. And also the fact, the claim that South Africa is the most developed was also quashed by looking at figures, because figures don't lie. Then we looked at the issue of currency, gold currency, livestock or movable assets like cars, donkeys, cats and dogs as collateral. We wonder what kind of financial institution is going to accept such nonsense. We are still to find out if Barclays Bank or other reputable financial institutions would accept that. And then, of course, we also talked about the resource curse in Africa, how it is helping to prop up governments, because once they have these resources in their control, it means to get a vote, they no longer need to sell sound economic policies, because they can just buy their way back into power using the proceeds from those resources. And how the dominance of a resource like oil for Nigeria, for example, means that, because Nigeria used to have another product. I can't remember whether it's coffee or some other product, which was doing very well. It's an agricultural product which was doing very well until oil came into the picture. And while oil came into the picture, it stole the limelight from that other product, because it means that government is getting more than 25% of their budgetary revenue just from the oil itself. And of course, it then puts pressure on imports, because luxury items are only being produced outside the country. So once you've got that forex, instead of using it to buy machinery and build industries, what they are doing is they are using that money to buy luxury items, which we always say, if a car leaves the factory in Germany, in Stuttgart, in Germany, once it has left the factory, if you try to return it the following day, okay, it has already gone down in value. So we're buying products which are going down in value the moment we purchase them. And so this is how some of the money is leaking out of the country. We talk about externalization of funds, but sometimes that externalization is quite deliberate. Besides, that money is being made in Germany or in America, and it's just going back to where it has been made. So we need to figure out how we can make our own money and how we can keep our own products within the African continent, and how we can also trade between African states, so that the 1.1, I'll call it 1.1 billion African population can sustain itself. Okay. So are there any closing statements from you, Elliot?
I think just to thank our viewers out there and to say from now onwards, as we journey towards the 2018 elections, various activities will be happening globally and within Zimbabwe, including a lot of political parties in Zimbabwe will be publishing policies and their manifestos. And this program will extend also the evaluation of those policies and manifestos, so that the people of Zimbabwe can actually make informed decisions. And we will start with the policies and manifesto of MDC. A few weeks to come, we'll be going through every policy of MDC and then evaluating, so people can make informed decisions. But before then, as I prepare to go to the forums and summit in Brussels to articulate the African position of the bilateral relationship between EU and Africa, we will be discussing the various thematic areas with the hope that our viewers will also give us some inputs. And throughout the process until the 7th and 8th of June, we want Zimbabweans out there to be part and parcel of the global initiative and effort for a better Africa and indeed for a better Zimbabwe. I thank you.
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you, viewers. We will be back again next week, I think on Sunday, Elliot.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, we'll try Sunday. We try to be live every Sunday. Today we're live on Saturday. It's just a change of plan, but we try to do every Sunday. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wakuruma.